Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I want to thank the organizers for making this possible. It is an honor to be speaking at Jagiellonian University. I've been hearing about it and reading about it for decades, my first visit, and I'm very proud to be here. So I'm going to be talking today about some of the ideas in my new book. Here's the Polish jacket of the book, and here's the American jacket of the book. The English jacket is a little different still. From bacteria to Bach and Back, the evolution of minds. Well, now there's a bacterium, and there's Bach. Today I'm going to concentrate on Back. After a swift review of the other parts of the book. It's a long, fairly detailed story, and I will try to highlight the major points of the path so that I can get to some points at the end which may be unsettling or surprising to you. Let's see. Here's my hero, Darwin, and I'm going to talk first about Darwin's strange inversion of reasoning. One of his early critics wrote a passage that I love to repeat because it is very eloquent and very impassioned. This is Robert Mackenzie Beverley writing in 1868, and he says, "In the theory with which we have to deal, absolute ignorance..." Oh. Okay.
That's my role.
If it catches on my beard, it's tough. Better?
Could you maybe manipulate your set? I heard that it's supposed to come as close to the mouth as possible.
Aha. How's that? I was once at a meeting in artificial intelligence with John McCarthy, a dear friend of mine and the coiner of the term artificial intelligence. We were sitting in the back, and a speaker began speaking, and somebody in the crowd yelled, "Louder!" So the speaker began to speak louder, and John yelled, "Funnier!" So I'll be ready for that if you try. I love the capital A, capital I that Mackenzie Beverley uses. Absolute ignorance is the artificer, so that we may enunciate as the fundamental principle of the whole system, that in order to make a perfect and beautiful machine, it is not requisite to know how to make it. This proposition will be found, on careful examination, to express in condensed form the essential purport of the theory, and to express in a few words all Mr. Darwin's meaning, who, by a strange inversion of reasoning, seems to think absolute ignorance fully qualified to take the place of absolute wisdom in all the achievements of creative skill. Exactly. That's just what Darwin was saying, and he was right. And it is a strange inversion of reasoning. For many people, it is still almost impossible for them to take it seriously, let alone believe it. But I submit that Darwin was right, that we know he was right, and now I'm going to talk about the implications of this strange inversion of reasoning. It raises a puzzle. We might express it as follows. How can a process with no intelligent designer create intelligent designers who can then design things that permit us to understand how a process with no intelligent designer can create intelligent designers who can then design things? It may look as if this is a trick with mirrors or some sort of subtle contradiction, but it isn't. It's not an easy question to answer, but it's possible. It's not impossible. What I will be doing today is sketching for you my answer, and there are others. That is, the details vary. Mainly what I'm going to give you is what I take to be the backbone of any good answer. What we have is not a dearth of possibilities. We have an embarrassing bounty of possibilities, and we're just working on figuring out which is the best one. We all begin with the great tree of life. This is my favorite diagram of the great tree of life. Let's see. I guess I can't use the pointer. No, I can't use the pointer. The outer boundary, that's today. Every living thing alive on the planet today is along that outer rim. Time moves out radially from the beginning, where you see the origin of life there in the black, and we see the archaea and the bacteria that were the first living organisms. And then we see a very important point, that where that sharp curve happens, that's the eukaryotic revolution, one of the great moments in evolutionary history. And you can see that it's a great moment right there, because to a first approximation, every living thing that's visible to the naked eye is a eukaryote, composed of eukaryotic cells. The plants and the animals, the birds and the fish, you and me and the redwood trees, we're all eukaryotes, and none of us would be possible if it weren't for this amazing transition that occurred about 2 billion years ago. And here's how it happened. There had been bacteria of many lineages, archaea of many lineages, bumping around for several billion years, developing different strengths and weaknesses, different capacities, and every now and then they bumped into each other. And when they did, the usual result was that one of them would eat the other, or one of them would invade the other and, as it were, take it apart from the inside. And sometimes they would both die. And very rarely, none of those happened, and instead, A engulfed B, and then AB moved on together. And it turned out that very rarely, but occasionally, AB together, joining forces, were more fit than either A or B by themselves. They formed a sort of partnership, and when they divided, they both divided together, so that you got 2 ABs and then 4 ABs and then 8 ABs and so forth. That was the endosymbiotic origin of the eukaryotic cell. We can see in this diagram, on the left is a bacterium, on the right a eukaryotic cell, and the eukaryotic cell is bigger, and it has these organelles, it has little parts. Those little parts are the descendants of the original invaders. For instance, the mitochondria that you have in all of your cells are the descendants of original mitochondria that invaded some bacterium and then created a eukaryotic cell way back when. Now that's about all I'm going to tell you about bacteria, except for one more thing. First of all, I should say, the person most responsible for convincing the world of biology that this was true is the late, great Lynn Margulis. Lynn was not the inventor of the idea, but she very bravely and persistently enunciated it and defended it and championed it against ferocious opposition for a long time, and she won. And now it's in all the textbooks, and she's the one responsible. So this invasion of prokaryotes and eukaryotes created, invasion of one prokaryote with another created the eukaryotic cell, and this was a great case of technology transfer. You think of it this way. This lineage has 1 billion years plus of R&D gone into making it what it is. So does this one. They join forces and they get a tremendous increase, an immediate increase in new capabilities. The eukaryotic cells can do a lot of things that bacteria can't do. And it was a case of endosymbiosis, one well-designed thing entering the body of another well-designed thing, making a much better designed thing in the process. A great leap forward in evolutionary space. So we can see then the eukaryotic revolution at that sharp curve in the sort of lower left. Now I want to enlarge the tree of life a little bit, and I want to look over here with the mammals, and you'll see down near the bottom a little Y on its side, not the bottom one, but the one up above that. That little Y there, that's about 6 million years on each branch. So at the base of the Y, at the crotch, we can put the common ancestor of us and the chimpanzee. That's how recent we are on the whole big tree of life. Now I'll just back up so you can see. We human beings, hominids, have been around for, being generous, 6 million years. Homo sapiens have been around for 100,000 years, 200,000 years, in that neighborhood. So we're talking about very recent history on the tree of life. Now, I like to adopt a sort of engineering perspective on all this and think of evolution as R&D, research and development. It's a design process that exploits information in the environment to create, maintain, and improve the design of things. And R&D takes time and energy. And there are two main varieties of R&D: evolution by natural selection and human intelligent design. Not capital I, capital E, not godly intelligent design, but human intelligent design by intelligent designers like you all in this room. And like Shakespeare and Copernicus and Einstein and Lynn Margulis and Marie Curie and all the rest. The two processes differ in fundamental ways. Evolution by natural selection is purposeless, foresightless, it's extremely costly. 99 out of 100 of its trials end in childless death. It's slow. Whereas intelligent design is purposeful, somewhat foresighted, governed by cost considerations, and usually, relatively fast. Think of all the technology that has been designed in the last 2,000 years and compare that 2,000 years to the billions of years since the eukaryotic revolution, and you get some idea of the difference in speed. Well, evolution may be slow and costly, but it is brilliant. I like to quote Francis Crick, who once jokingly spoke, many times jokingly spoke, of what he calls Orgel's second rule, named after his colleague Leslie Orgel. Evolution is cleverer than you are. This encapsulates a very frequent experience among evolutionary biologists. They see some feature of some organism, it might be a bacterium or it might be a tree or a bird or a fish, that seems to be ill-designed, a bit of bad cobbling together, and they're marveling at what a bad design this is, and then later they figure out, no, actually, it's more devious and clever than you ever imagined. It's a better design than any you could make yourself. This has happened so many times in the last century that this Orgel's second rule has many confirming instances. That doesn't make it, of course, always true, but pretty close. Well, we have intelligent design now, and it's becoming ever more intelligent. And this has some surprising implications, and that's really what I want to talk to after I've built the case up to intelligent design. I want now to describe the process that brought us to the age of intelligent design, which is the age that we live in. And it's very recent, maybe 100,000 years old, no more than that. On the left, that's a termite castle in Australia. On the right is La Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, Antoni Gaudi's great masterpiece. They are eerily similar in shape and in structure. They are both brilliant engineering constructions, brilliantly designed, beautiful, strong, and intensely practical and useful for what they're for. So they're very similar. They're artifacts made by animals. The one on the left is made by termites, who are not all that impressive. In fact, we might say they're clueless. They are myopic, and they have no boss, there's no architect, there's no blueprints, there's no manifesto, there's no principles of best practice written out anywhere. There's just several million termites myopically doing their little thing, and this amazing structure is the result. Contrasted with the termites is Gaudi, who was the perfect contrast because he was charismatic, megalomaniac, egotistical, brilliant. He had manifestos and blueprints and defenses, and this was all worked out in advance. Of course, it changed a lot, still being changed. It still isn't finished. So we have, on the one hand, bottom-up R&D by the termites and top-down R&D by Gaudi. They're fundamentally different processes of research and development, and the puzzle about them is this. First of all, what you're seeing here is a couple of neurons in a Petri dish, and what you've got between your ears is, by latest count, 86 billion, give or take a few, 86 billion clueless neurons, and they're even more clueless than termites. They are stunningly myopic. None of them knows who you are or cares. And yet, if you put together 86 billion of them, they make a brain, which makes a mind. Now, here's the puzzle. I've just described bottom-up design and top-down design, and here's the question. Termite colony might be 70 million clueless termites, a brain 86 billion clueless neurons. How do you get a Gaudi-type mind out of a termite colony brain? Termite colonies are, as colonies, pretty smart. They air condition their houses, and they guard their food supplies, and they go foraging in very efficient ways. The whole colony is so smart that early researchers went so far as to say the colony itself had a soul. The Soul of the White Ant was a famous book written about termites 150 years ago. A soul, a res cogitans, as Descartes would say. It doesn't have a res cogitans. It's just millions of termites. And of course, however brilliant a termite colony is, it can't write poetry or design automobiles or go to war against other creatures or build ships or create great art. It can't do any of that. So now we have our puzzle. Somehow, the billions of neurons in your brain, each individually clueless, none of them knowing anything about you, can be harnessed together in a system that can do things that are way beyond the capabilities of a termite colony. And I think you will probably agree, beyond the abilities of a million termite colonies working together. How is that possible? And here is the short answer. I owe this to my former student and friend in Sweden. You can't do much carpentry with your bare hands, and you can't do much thinking with your bare brain. A termite colony is a bare brain. Intelligent designers have well-equipped brains. They have lots of thinking tools. Now, when did they get their tools? Well, over there, somewhere in the last million years. You can go back a million years to the first hominid tools, go back further than that a bit. But it's a very recent development, tools, and especially thinking tools, which are more recent still. And how did they get their tools? Well, here's the wrong answer. Technology is a gift of God. After the gift of life, it is perhaps the greatest of God's gifts. It is the mother of civilizations, of arts, and of sciences. That's my friend Freeman Dyson. I say it's the wrong answer. The first sentence is the wrong answer. Everything else is true. Yes, technology is the mother of civilizations, of arts, and of sciences. Technology, tools, designed tools. But Dyson is wrong to just declare that this is a miraculous gift from on high. We have to tell a bottom-up story, not a top-down one. We have to take Darwin's strange inversion of reasoning seriously. So the long answer is that cultural evolution designed thinking tools that impose novel structures on our brains. Cultural evolution is a separate, a distinct process of natural selection, not of genes, but of cultural items, which creates evolved virtual machines. I used to have to explain what virtual machines were, but I think it's entered the vocabulary of most people by this point. Virtual machines are not made out of pistons and rods and cogs. They're made out of information. They're software. Your cell phone, your mobile phone has lots of virtual machines on it. They're apps that we download into our necktops. And those are the source of our power and versatility. In order to understand this, we have to look at another strange inversion of reason due to Alan Turing, another one of my heroes. Remember, here's Darwin's strange inversion of reasoning. In order to make a perfect and beautiful machine, it is not requisite to know how to make it. I'm going to just change a few words and give you Turing's. In order to be a perfect and beautiful computing machine, it is not requisite to know what arithmetic is. When Turing came along, there were plenty of computers. They were mostly women, poorly paid. They'd read maths in university, a lot of them, and that was their job. What are you? I'm a computer. I work for the government. I work for corporations. And what Turing realized was, even though this was a technical job and these people knew what arithmetic was, it wasn't necessary. They could be replaced by a machine that didn't know anything, didn't know addition, didn't know what arithmetic was at all, but it could add and subtract, divide and multiply better than any human being. And that was the birth of the computer, in our sense of the word today. So the two of them together, actually coming from different places, arrive at the same wonderful idea. My bumper sticker for this is competence without comprehension. According to this view, mind or consciousness or understanding is not the cause, it's an effect. Comprehension is an effect of competence rather than the other way around. Now, this is in itself a strange inversion. Many of you, maybe most of you, are university students, and most of the rest of you no doubt have university degrees. Why did you go to university and why did you take those courses? Because you and your parents thought, in order to be competent in this world, you've got to comprehend, you have to understand. Comprehension is the source of competence. And we all look down at rote learning and mindless drill and so forth, and we think, no, the way to get real competence is to start with comprehension. We might call that the Cartesian top-down way. And what Darwin and Turing showed is, no, that's backwards. Comprehension is a product of competence, not the other way around. As you add competences, you gradually build up to comprehension. Comprehension isn't some miraculous talent that drops down out of the sky. It is the result of putting together lots and lots of mindless competences, whether by computer circuitry or termites or neurons. Termites are not intelligent designers. They don't understand what they're doing. Beavers are not very intelligent designers. In fact, we are the first intelligent designers in the tree of life. And this is a very recent biological phenomenon. And it's had some huge biological effects. The late, great Paul MacCready, the green engineer and theoretician who, some of you may know him as the inventor of the gossamer albatross, the bicycle-powered plane that flew across the English Channel, powered just by a human cyclist. A wonderful man. And he calculated that 10,000 years ago, and that's roughly when agriculture got started, human population plus livestock and pets was approximately 0.1% of the terrestrial vertebrate biomass. Vanishing. This is a very minor species with a few tag-along companion species, livestock. 0.1%, 10,000 years ago. Today, it's considerably higher. Would anybody hazard a guess of what the percentage is today? You said 98? You're right. 98%. Yes. Yes, this is a knowing audience. It's still amazingly surprising. 98%. Now, most of that's cattle. But we have transformed the planet. This is one of the largest transformations in the biosphere in the history of life on the planet, and it happened in 10,000 years. And what explains it? Human engineering, technology, design, intelligent design. MacCready says, over billions of years on a unique sphere, chance has painted a thin covering of life, complex, improbable, wonderful, and fragile. Suddenly, we humans have grown in population, technology, and intelligence to a position of terrible power. We now wield the paintbrush, for better or for ill. So, This was a result, I'm claiming, of another great technology transfer, not unlike the eukaryotic revolution. The invasion of human brains by symbiotic thinking tools, what Dawkins calls memes. We don't inherit them via our genes. We don't have to design them ourselves. They come already designed. Check this out. I mean, how many of you could have invented long division or cost-benefit analysis or calculus or just alphabetizing a list of words? Your mind is filled with thinking tools that make life easier for you. You didn't have to design them. You got them ready-made. And you just installed them and you were off, just like installing an app. The thing is that nobody had to design them. They were designed by differential replication in exactly the same way that your genes were designed and the parts of your bodies that your genes transmit information about. So memes are things that are made of information. They're habits or ways of doing things. They differ from instincts in that instincts are ways of doing things that are transmitted genetically. Memes are ways of doing things that are transmitted perceptually, socially. That's really the only difference. Best example are words. Words are memes that can be pronounced, and each one is a little thinking tool. When you add a word to your vocabulary, you have added a new tool to your kit. Numbers, another fine thinking tool. Poems, symphonies, theories, proofs, algorithms. So the McCready explosion is an explosive amplification of competence. Initially, competence without comprehension, evolving into competence with comprehension. We now comprehend, as it were in retrospect, most of the great achievements of R&D that culture has given us, but we didn't have to comprehend them when they arrived. They were designed just as cluelessly as the termite castle is designed by a process of cultural natural selection. So now we want to invert the Darwinian strange inversion. We want to move from bottom-up, mindless creation to top-down, mindful, comprehending competence. And the intermediate step is what I call free-floating rationales. Trees do things for reasons, but they don't reason. Fungi do things for reasons, they don't reason. The biotic world is saturated with reasons from the molecule on up. Everywhere you look, there's reasons why things are the way they are. We, human beings, clever folks that we are, we can articulate these reasons. When these reasons are articulated, they cease to be free-floating. They are now anchored to expressions of reasons in the minds and books of human beings, and that's the first time they've ever been articulated or expressed. Evolution does not need to articulate the reasons why it does the things it does. And we do things. We blink, we shiver, we vomit for reasons that we don't understand. Consider yawning. Nobody knows, really, yet, why we yawn. There's probably a reason. It'll probably be figured out pretty soon. We know why we shiver. We know why we vomit. But knowing why is not necessary for being the beneficiary of this instinct in those cases that we have. We also often choose and decide and act for reasons that we don't need to appreciate. I have lots of examples of this in my book. So here's the problem that culture solves. How do you get a Bach mind out of a termite colony brain? How do we get intelligent design with representation of reasons out of 86 billion mindless neurons? The second great endosymbiotic revolution, human culture, we're apes with infected brains. This is a three-dimensional diagram first used by Peter Godfrey Smith. I'm not going to go into detail on this. I just want to use this to structure your imagination a little bit. This is a space of cultural items. We can place things in it. And the three dimensions along the x-axis, you see bottom up versus top down. So we put the termite castle R&D in the lower left-hand corner. Top down is intelligent design, but let's look at the other scales. Comprehension is on the vertical dimension. So as we move up through that three-dimensional space, we're talking about things which were aided by more and more comprehension in order to get built. And then on the fore and after or z-axis, we have random versus directed search. Random search is you just guessing at random. Directed search is when you have a lot of information to focus your search much more precisely. And way up in the right-hand, far right-hand corner, we have intelligent design. In the low left-hand corner, we have Darwinian design. Now, the claim I'm making is that cultural evolution started in the lower left-hand corner, right down there with the termites. Human cultural evolution started off, the human beings were just about as clueless as termites. They were the beneficiaries of new habits that invaded them and that spread that were contagious. And only gradually, over eons, did they become more self-aware, more self-conscious, more comprehending of what they were doing. And this is recapitulated in children. Children, they talk before they know what talking is. They don't know what talking is. They don't even know what words are until they've got quite a vocabulary. And that's the way it was in the early days. I'm going to put Picasso up in the upper right-hand corner, not because he's the most intelligent designer of all time, but because he said he was. Je ne cherche pas, je trouve. I don't search, I find. I leap in a godlike way to the maximum, to the highest point in design space with no grubby trial and error, no random search. I just nail it right from the beginning. I am a genius. That is the perfect boast of the intelligent designer. And nobody, not even Picasso, can live up to it. And if you study the biography of any great creative mind, you'll find lots of trial and error, lots of mistakes, lots of backing and filling. Picasso had one brilliant addition to add to the grubby business of trial and error. He signed and sold all the errors. I want to replace him with Bach because I think Bach is actually a better example of an intelligent designer than Picasso. And besides, it is alliteratively close to bacteria. Bach was an exemplary intelligent designer, deep comprehension of what he was doing, highly constrained trial and error methods. It was constrained by knowledge, by comprehension, by foresight. He was magnificently equipped with thinking tools and with music theory, vast knowledge of history of music. What a lot of people don't know is he was also a technocrat of his day. He didn't just design organs, he repaired organs. He was not just an organist. He had a deep appreciation. Organs were the high-tech music of his age, and he was more known as an organist than as a composer during his life. On the left, we see an Acheulean hand axe. Our ancestors made these for over 1 million years with no discernible improvements. 1 million years. Very strange. On the right, of course, you see a mouse. Nobody invented the Jagiellonian hand axe. Douglas Engelbart invented the mouse, and it's on the verge of extinction in only a few decades. The pace of R&D has picked up dramatically in recent years. Now for an intermediate case. A philosopher Alain, writing in 1908 about French fishing boats, wrote the following: every boat is copied from another boat. Let reason as follows in the manner of Darwin. It is clear that a very badly made boat will end up at the bottom after one or two voyages and thus never be copied. One could say then, with complete rigor, that it is the sea herself who fashions the boats, choosing those which function and destroying the others. If it comes home, copy it. That's natural selection. And notice that the boat copiers don't have to understand the principles. They may think they understand the principles of marine architecture and hydroengineering and so forth, but they don't have to. In fact, they may make terrible mistakes if they think they understand better than the sea what makes a good boat. Over many generations of boats, the boats become more and more seaworthy, and they don't have genes, they have memes. So now we're in the age of intelligent design, and cultural evolution has become ever more top-down, ever more comprehending and self-comprehending, ever more refined in its search methods. And so has genetic evolution, thanks to our intelligent designers. We have genetically modified food, we have Craig Venter, we have all the celebrated and castigated triumphs of molecular biology to look at. And the pace of development is getting faster and faster, thanks to CRISPR and other technologies, and now gene drive. We're entering an ever-accelerating period of R&D in the age of intelligent design. But now I want to talk about the age of post-intelligent design, which it seems we're now entering. In many fields, intelligent designers are exploiting the truth of Orgel's second rule. Evolution is cleverer than you are. They're using evolutionary and quasi-evolutionary processes on the computer to do the heavy lifting. There's genetic algorithms, which are very much evolutionary inspired. There's deep learning, which you must have heard of. Evolutionary architecture, buildings being designed by evolutionary algorithms to optimize letting in the light, being cost effective, having a small carbon footprint, being easy to heat, and so forth. There's nanotechnology. And there's machine learning, things like Watson, IBM's Watson, Google Translate, and many, many others. It's in the news every day. And it's leading to what some people worry about under the term black box science. It's getting to the point now where you can have a really good scientific question you want answered, and there's a black box algorithm, a deep learning system. You feed the data into that and it gives you the answer, and you don't have to understand it at all. This is competence without comprehension. And it doesn't understand it either. It can't explain what it's done. It's any more than natural selection can explain how it designed birds. So we're beginning to be gifted with products of evolutionary design coming out of computers. Noam Chomsky is famous. For decades, he's been arguing that there are two kinds of problems. There's puzzles, which we can solve, and mysteries, which we can't. This was a point of almost theology for him, I guess. And from my point of view, this was always awkward, because among the mysteries that we couldn't solve were consciousness and free will, two of my favorite topics. And he was basically saying, don't even try. It's simply beyond human ken. We'll never understand those. Interestingly, he's changed his tune a little bit. First of all, he inspired a second generation of Chomsky fans, Jerry Fodor, Colin McGinn, and indirectly Thomas Nagel, to argue that the mind will remain a mystery forever. It is beyond the power of the human brain to understand the mind. The brain is too complicated to understand itself. Here's what Chomsky said recently. While there is a conceptual distinction between problems and mysteries, we accept the best explanation science can give us, even when we can't imagine how they work. And then he says this, it doesn't matter what we can conceive anymore. We've given up on that. Now, a remarkable statement from Chomsky, and I don't think it's true, but I think it's on the edge of truth, raises the question of whether comprehension matters. Should we just give up on comprehension and just settle for black box science? I hope not. Do we want to have technological competence without comprehension? DARPA, which has funded a lot of this research, that's the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency of the Pentagon, has a new initiative for research on so-called explainable AI, the whole point of which is to make AI systems that can explain how they got the results, explain in terms that a user can understand. And of course, since they've got a lot of money, a lot of researchers are putting in their bids for how they're going to make explainable AI. And some of this I think will work and some will be good, but I think there's a great danger. Should we try to make persons out of these AIs? A lot of people think this is natural and it's going to happen. And the reason they think it's a good thing is so that they can explain their reasoning to us. So they can develop their own imaginative curiosity and their own epistemic goals. The con against this is the idea that this will blur the lines of moral responsibility. I submit there's a great difference between an intelligent tool and a colleague. Some people want to make AIs into colleagues with moral responsibility and consciousness. Others want to keep them as tools. You can take apart any time you like. You don't hold them responsible. You hold yourself responsible for using the tool and not abusing the tool and not misusing the tool. And that's the goal that I think we should be pursuing. And the way I think we should pursue it is even with legal innovations. We should license users of these new systems. They should be bonded and there should be strict liability laws. In other words, if you are licensed to use one of these AIs, and I use, you're not collaborating with this AI, you're using it. It's a tool, a very powerful tool. If you're licensed to use that tool and you make a judgment, you issue recommendations that are followed that lead to disaster, you are responsible. You don't get to say, well, I didn't know that there was this flaw in the system. You're held responsible for flaws even if you couldn't know about them because the company hadn't told you about them or didn't themselves know about them. That's how strict liability laws work. They work for pharmacists. They work for other professions where you have people using tools that are dangerous, very powerful, but could be very dangerous. You impose a very stern constraint on users so that they will make their due diligence particularly strong. And then, of course, you're going to have malpractice insurance because you would never take on a job like this with the risk of being utterly ruined if you ever were found negligent. And the insurance companies will put a tremendous pressure on the builders of AI to expose every known flaw, every weakness, every gap in the systems that they sell. I don't know how it is in Poland, but in the United States, these laws now are on the books for pharmaceuticals. And if you watch on television, you see a new prescription drug being advertised, and it's always accompanied by a hilariously long list of known and suspected side effects that might be bad. And it's required by law, and they have to list all of these, otherwise they would be in very big trouble. So I want AI purveyors to live under the same rule, exposing the flaws that they know and training operators to recognize those flaws, and not letting people use their machines until they can show that they can catch the flaws. Then the makers will have the incentive to advertise the flaws, the weaknesses in their system. It will be a sort of reverse Turing test, where the computer challenges the user to find the flaws, the gaps, the shortcomings. And if you don't pass the test, you don't get your license. You can't use the system. Years ago, I and a colleague started this curricular software studio at Tufts. And our motto for what we were doing is using computers to empower people, to increase their intelligence. Well, there's two kinds of empowerment. There's the bulldozer way, where you can now move great amounts of earth around, but you're still a weakling. And then there's the Nautilus machine, where the technology is used actually to build up your personal power. We think you can apply the same distinction to AI. You can make systems, the point of which is not simply to extend the reach of your data gathering and analysis, but to train you to be more comprehending, to teach you how to comprehend things that you don't now comprehend. And that, I think, is the path that we should follow. Two kinds of empowerment. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you a lot. You have infected a lot of brains today, that's for sure. So now is a good time, if you have scribbled anything on your small pieces of paper, I guess our helpers will move around the room and collect them, and then we will find if there's anything to maybe infect your mind in return. But so far, there was actually one question that was asked online. I think we can start with this one, which is, within your frame of thinking about the human mind, is it possible that there are things happening inside consciousness which you cannot possibly explain, even to yourself? So, contents of consciousness which are formally indescribable. Is there place for this? Well, so in the framework of evolutionary mind theory, could something evolve that is completely incomprehensible to the mind and you cannot English it?
There seems to be, but I don't think there are. I think one of the great obstacles to getting on with the business of coming up with a good theory of consciousness is that, for well-understood reasons, there's a strong temptation to inflate the phenomena beyond the wonderfulness and strangeness that they are. And people routinely suppose that they're conscious of much more and of much stranger than in fact they are. They are themselves deluded about what's going on in their own minds. And sometimes we can show this very straightforwardly, and I take great delight in showing people that they don't know as much about their own consciousness as they think they do. Since Descartes, we've had this tradition that our minds are transparent to ourselves. that there's nothing I know better than my own mind, and nobody else could know it anywhere near as well. Forget it, it's false. It's just false. There are lots of things that are going on in your mind that are very central to you as a person, as an intelligence, that you have no inkling about whatever, and science can tell you about those things, and only third-person science can tell you about that thing. There are other things that you are, in effect, authoritative about, but much less than you might suppose.
Okay, thank you. And the second, I will just move around those pieces of paper in just a minute, but there's one more. This one is about forgetting some of your tools, yes. The question was, do you expect the thoughts and the tools, the mental tools, to become extinct? And what is the dynamics of extinction? Is it the same sort of dynamics that happens in biological evolution? Do these things become extinct as often as species? You know,
yes, yes, I think the answer is...
Most of the species are actually extinct, and the question, I guess, is, are most of the mind tools that we have operated in the past, are they extinct, or do we just accumulate and just accumulate?
Oh, it's a good question, and the answer in some regards is obvious. Today there's about people have different counts. There are 5,000, 6,000 natural languages alive in various states of health around the world. That's 5,000 out of hundreds of thousands that have existed in the past. The rest have gone extinct. So most of the languages that have ever been spoken have gone extinct. And languages are going extinct at a very great rate. Probably before Christmas, another dozen languages will go extinct. And field linguists are trying to at least record some of these before they're lost. And when they're lost, they're really lost. They're lost even more inaccessibly than dinosaurs. There are efforts now to reconstitute dinosaurs by basically starting with chickens and doing genetic engineering backwards, making chickasaurs and then other dinosaurs. I mean, this is serious science. It's going on right now. But you're not going to do that with a lost language. There's no fossil traces. There's no DNA.
But continuing on that, would you subscribe to some sort of linguistic universalism that languages are actually, it's just a single tool? The concept would be that there's 5,000 languages, but if there is at least one left, then we retain the same basic capability of languaging. And it's sort of like there is 1,000 word processors, but if we just have one, that we have this particular tool. It's not about the flavor, it's about the whole concept of using a language. Or are different languages different tools?
Well, here's where we enter into the controversial waters of the Whorf hypothesis and whether or not you think differently in different languages. And this was a very popular idea in the last century. Then it was very influentially debunked by a lot of people. And now there are a few researchers who are coming back with new evidence that suggests that in some rather subtle ways, your native tongue does either augment or constrain the way you think about some things. So it is not clear that any language will do. And even if the old proverbs about, French is the language of diplomacy, and German is the language of science, and Italian is the language of love, English is the language of commerce, there may be a grain of truth in those, but not much. And the loss of a language is, I think, a very great cultural loss. In the same way that a loss of biodiversity is a great loss. The same reasons that lead people to establish seed banks and comb through the jungles of the Amazon looking for plants that need particular protection. I think the same thing should go for language, because they embody a lot of R&D, a lot of technology.
Okay. Thank you. This is, I don't know, maybe it's a tricky question. What is the first Orgel's rule?
What is Orgel's first rule? I don't know. I never asked Crick.
That's why I hesitated. It's one of those tricky
yeah.
questions.
I think he just made that up.
I have an even better one. How can we defend ourselves from, quote, militarized thinking tools?
What was the?
Militarized thinking tools. I guess the question is, should we be afraid?
Oh, yes. Well, basically every technology that's ever been invented has been put to some military use, some aggressive use, whether it's boats or planes or printing presses or whatever, everything. So, of course, the thinking tools that we are developing at great rates today are always candidates for being put to some militaristic use. And I think the only way you can guard against that is eternal vigilance. And we just have to make sure that our children grow up learning that they shouldn't trust everything, and that there are many very attractive options out there which may turn out to be not so good for them after all. After all, all the things that now afflict us start out being very attractive. Cell phones, wonderful. Mobile phones, you probably call them cell phones. But now people are beginning to realize they can become addictive and they can stunt your life in many ways. So we should bear that example in mind.
And I think we have time for one more question. So out of the many quite interesting ones, the one that you kind of naturally led us into, and it's a very practical question, I love it. It's simple. What tools to increase our comprehension would you suggest? The background of the question is that we sometimes outcompete even our parents in competence, but not necessarily in comprehension. And in the age of of internet and broad access to tools, what are your favorite tools to increase the comprehension?
Well, when I was working with my colleague and some wonderful coders to do the software studio, we had the concept of what we called a concept piano. And here's how that came about. I was looking all the time for new applications of the talent we had in the software studio, thinking, can we design a software system that will help teachers widen pedagogical bottlenecks in their teaching? So we had a wonderful tool for population genetics, and another one for computers themselves, and another one for geology. And I was talking one day with a friend of mine who's a musicologist, and was talking about and a music theorist. And I said, let's sit down and design a tool that would be a great way of exploring music theory that would be user-friendly and definitely extensible. And we thought about it for an hour or so, and I said, you know what we've just done, Mark? We've just reinvented the piano. The piano is a wonderful user-friendly thing. You don't have to worry about fine-tuning. It's already tuned for you. Just very easy to push the buttons. You've got several different visual arrays that you can map between. There's the music paper, there's the black and white keys, there's high and low. It's all set out in a wonderfully intuitive way, and it's just inexhaustible as a way of exploring at least Western harmony. the well-tempered scale. And so I thought, well, okay, so Mark, you don't need our services. You've already got your perfect tool. Don't need any help from us software people. But then I turned it around and said, so now you know what we're trying to do. We're trying to make concept pianos in all other fields. So, for instance, the late Steve Gould complained to me once that his students at Harvard, they needed to learn how to read stratigraphy drawings, layers of geological layers in the fossils in the layers. And he tried to teach them how to draw and read stratigraphic diagrams. And he said the trouble is that the best students get it, and the other students trace the diagrams of the best students when they hand in their homework. And I said, Steve, have we got a tool for you? We worked with a geologist and made, this was way back in the days of IBM PCs. We made a paint program where the primitives were geological events, like depositing a layer of sediment and another layer of sediment. And then you could fracture them, you could fold them, you could have magma coming up, and it would keep redrawing the picture as you had another geological event. And so the trick was that we never got it to market, but that Steve or any other person teaching stratigraphy and paleology could simply use the program to draw a particular diagram, send that picture file to the student and say, draw this using this system. And the only way you could do it is by understanding the principles of how geology works. And some events happen over millions of years, and some events happen very fast, and it's all modeled in the system. And what I loved about it was that it was open-ended. You didn't have to use it to do your homework in geology. In fact, when I was developing it with a dear friend, a colleague, my son, who was then about 8 or 10, got interested in it. I had a copy of it at home that we were working on, and he spent hours trying to get it to write his initials in the stratigraphy, using the rules of stratigraphy. He was learning a lot about geology as he was doing it, but he could put it to some other purpose. So I think the idea of making concept pianos, using software to create virtual worlds that require people to get a lot of hands-on experience in difficult domains is a great way of proceeding.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you all for the other questions we weren't unfortunately able to ask. And this is about time. Unfortunately, we won't be able to have the signing round. That's that. But we all thank you dearly for your lecture. We salute you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Dziękuję. Yeah.
I think we'll be going.
Yeah.